3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Peoria Art Guild's next exhibition. This is Confluence of Color with Cathie Crawford, and we have the artist with us today. I think the most important thing about this whole exhibit is the word color, because it is so colorful. Cathie is been in Peoria since the 1980s, correct? And has been here and is by far the most premier printmaker we have in our city. She's focused, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but she's focused right now for the last, 35 years on the reduction woodcut. And that is what we have in our exhibit here today, our reduction woodcuts. So we're gonna start here, and Cathie will just kind of have a conversation about prints. The three prints that you have here are kind of the 360, the full circle for Cathie. This one was in her MFA show at Bradley University just a few years ago. And then we have her newest print here. And as you can see, you can really see Cathie has her own visual language. It's just like a signature. She starts to carve into the plate, and the marks just keep creating. In these three cases, I think they're more of a landscape type of creation. She was good enough to bring one of her plates. And Cathie, why don't you explain what a reduction woodcut is really all about?
Well, my matrix is 1/4-inch plywood, and I start by usually inking up the uncut piece of wood in a beautiful blended roll. And then after I print the whole edition, and I must decide at that time how many I want to make because I can't go back and make more later. After I print the whole edition with this beautiful blended roll, then I start cutting away whatever I want to stay the colors of the blended roll. And then I print the next run and another blended roll and cut some more wood away and then print another run. This particular print, Summer Soleil, for me is the essence of summer, and it was completed in 7 runs through the printing press.
And I think that's important for people to understand that the way that the reduction woodcut is, even though she's reducing the matrix, she's building the color. And it seems kind of odd because it is just the way that the process is. And I think it's really interesting because I don't believe you started out as a woodcut artist. Did
No,
you
I
really?
was a lithographer for 15 years, and I went to graduate school to become a better lithographer and rediscovered the woodcut instead. And I've stuck with it ever since. This one that goes back to my graduate school days is called Bereshit, which is Hebrew for in the beginning. And it is my interpretation of the passage in the Bible of Genesis when God separates the vapors into sky and water. And water's been a recurring theme throughout my printmaking career. Basically everything in this show has something to do with water.
Well, and we know that, and Jeff and I have been good friends with her, and we know it. Both of the houses that you've had here in Peoria, you've always had a koi pond too.
Yes.
I mean, and it is, and you have a swimming pool now. So it really is an affinity to water. And I think what's one of the best experiences you ever had? Was it swimming with dolphins and sharks and stuff like that? And you made a print of it. And you made a print of it. That's just
And I'd rather be 30 feet under on a beautiful coral reef than just about any place else on Earth. But water is my place of replenishment and restoration. I always seek out water. I just like to be close to water. I grew up on the water. My most cherished childhood memories are at the beach in Long Island, New York, and I just always been attracted to water.
Well, and I think one of the most amazing thing is that, like even here in your very early work, the blues, you have so many different kinds of blues that just kind of embrace the subject matter as well as the wood, works well with the wood. And I think that there are a lot of people that do that. I mean, we have a lot of landscape artists here in Illinois, and I know like Harold Greger would have like 16 to 20 different shades of green in his paintings. And I think in your prints, the same goes for blue quite often. Not all the time, but quite often. Let's talk about your second newest print here.
Anima Mundi, that means soul of the world, and this was my sheltering in place print. I did this when we were supposed to be staying home and not venturing out anywhere, and it came together pretty quickly. I completed it in 7 runs, and I cut very little wood. This is mostly pochoir, which is done with mylar stencils, and so very little wood was cut. It's mostly just done with mylar stencils. And when I was working on this print, I was really thinking about Mother Earth and how she was really getting even with us during this pandemic. And we may not survive, but the Earth will go on. The planet will do whatever it needs to protect itself.
I think one of the most interesting things is that with the palette, you've gone from the very high yellows down to almost black with the green here. But every exhibit we have, we do a card, and we unfortunately always have to kind of adjust the card to the format for a postcard. And I know here we took that out, and Jeff and I were just like, I mean, it was a wonderful postcard, but it's like, I can't live without just this little bit of peach. It's almost peach too. It's not, it's, you know, not as orange as up here, but it's just peach. But there's something about the reflection and the balance between your colors. Which was the first color? What do you usually work with when you're doing a blend?
Well,
Do you?
this was one blend at the top, and it was done with a mylar stencil. So the first run was just the sky.
And what she does
and
in
I kind of worked down, but this was, I think, the 3rd or 4th run, and the water was last.
And what she does when she does a blend is she's got 3 bands or 4 bands of ink. And then she takes her roller, which your rollers are pretty big.
Big litho
and
rollers,
they blend the thing right onto the roller, and then when you adhere it to the plate, to the matrix, then you get this wonderful graduated color scheme that just
And I
is
love the in-between colors I get that can only really happen in a blended roll.
Yeah.
You know, you're blending 2 colors together, that's where
And you
the
have some
theme of
control
the-
with knowledge, but not always with nature. It
Yeah.
happens. And the other thing I think, and so many of your works, there are these small details like the overlay and how the blues get darker and lighter, and you have these wonderful, almost sensuous lines that come to it. Let's talk about Spectrum here, which is a reduction woodcut. Now, Jeff and I wanted to show a sense of scale too with your work, and how you can start with one thing and then it goes a little smaller, but it still has the same dynamics. It's really incredible that you can take and condense them on paper, but yet you still have this wonderful light that comes through your paper and your work.
Well, I'm very proud of this print because I completed this image in only 2 runs through the press. This was done in 2017, and prior to that, I was doing prints that involved 15, 16. The most runs I ever put on one sheet of paper was 21, and when I did that, I knew I'd gone a little crazy. I said, I've got to figure out how to make art. This is ridiculous. So I was very pleased that this was planned as 3 runs, but when I finished the 2nd run, I thought it doesn't need another thing. And I was so happy with it.
Is that difficult for you to sometimes stop? Or do you want to sometimes go just a little farther?
This one, I just knew right away it was finished. Not always. Sometimes I struggle, and sometimes I'll plan another run and it doesn't work out, and I just go back and say, well, that was a mistake, and we're going to stop here.
We're going to come over here, and one of these is a regular reduction woodcut, and then one of these is a monoprint. Can you explain what monoprint means?
Monoprint is a one-of-a-kind, unique print, but it is printed from a printing matrix, unlike monotypes, which have no printing matrix. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they are 2 very specific categories of printmaking. And what happened with this print is it started out as part of this edition, and for some reason I forgot to print two prints in this edition. This should have been an edition of 12, and it's an edition of 10 because I forgot on the second run to print two of the first runs. So I had them sitting around the studio, and when I printed Spectrum, I thought, well, what do I have to lose? I'm going to try, before I cleaned up my ink, I decided I would put that blended roll over the first run of Serendipity, and I got Inception, and I had two, so I didn't want to have an edition of two, so I deliberately printed the next one upside down. This is the one that was printed upside down, and that became Inception 3.
And I do, and I love, it's amazing. I don't think people understand that the plywood, it's pretty, it's a sturdy wood. It's not quite as soft as some other woods. And yet, your lines here are just like you took a brush or some kind of, just making an easy stroke to it. And it just is so wonderful. It's light, it's almost calligraphic in nature. And I am so glad you did qualify monoprint and monotype, because at the University of Iowa, we were very specific about never talking about your monotype, which has no printmaking process endeavored into it, and it really works well. Here's a grid that my brother and I installed that has to do with basically the same imagery, but that each one has its own kind of a character. You know, do you want to talk a little bit about these?
Well, the first one was Serenity, and it was my first small print, basically, 6 by 12. I'd never worked that small before, and it was very successful. It sold out in just a couple of months, and I kept one for myself. So I decided, well, I'm going to reuse this block, and I made, this one was the second one I did, Samsara, using the same block of wood but printing in different colors. And that sold really well, and so I pushed it a little further, and I ended up with Serenity 2 and Samsara 2. But they were all printed from the same block of wood, just different blended rolls, two different blended rolls, different combinations of color.
And do you get the same satisfaction out of trying to do something like that where you're, I hate to say recycling because it's terrible, but we've got a terrible connotation with recycling really. But you're reusing something that has a life of its own, but then you've made it into something that's a little more intimate and a little more precious. That's not a bad thing, but if they make them more precious in this regard. Was there any inspiration, any landscape that you had seen that
No,
created
it's
this?
an imaginary landscape. By this time I was thinking more non-objectively, and I wasn't looking at really any specific landscape or photograph. For years I used to work from my own photographs, and now I'm working more intuitively. I've kind of come full circle, because in my early years of being a printmaker, I did work very non-objectively or abstractly, and then I got more and more figurative, and now I've come completely around again.
Let's talk about this next piece, because she brought another, one of her matrix or her plates here, and this one has a different body sense to it as far as what you did with the inks, and the landscape gets a little firmer and a little bit bulkier, I guess would be a good way to say it. What is the process for this?
Mocolito is the name of the process, and it's lithography on wood. And I did not cut any wood for this particular woodcut. There's no cutting involved. I used 2 blocks of wood. 1 block of wood was strictly for background color, and I did that all pourquois with Mylar stencils. And then after I finished all of this wonderful background color, I printed the Mocolito block twice, first in a transparent white, and then I overprinted it a second time in a very transparent blue. And the principle of lithography works on water and grease will always repel one another, so the drawing is done with greasy materials, and it's etched with gum arabic to stabilize the non-image areas and make them absorb water and repel ink, and the drawn areas are going to track ink and repel water. So it works like traditional lithography, but it's not as stable as traditional lithography. But I'm very pleased because I was able to get an edition of 10, a consistent edition of 10, and so I consider this Mocolito quite a success. But it's only my second Mocolito, and I'm still learning the process and trying new things, and I hope to do another one soon.
I think that's great. Here's a very unique situation that Jeff and I did when we were curating the show. We were at Cathie's house, and we saw this, but then we saw this, and they mirror each other so well. And we had to put, it was sort of like an exclamation point next to this very large. But talk a little bit about this imagery and how you could translate it from the larger size. And this is a good size print for a woodcut. You don't usually get much larger than that, do you?
Yeah, 24 by 36 was my standard size since the 80s, but then my paper maker died and the paper was no longer available, so then I had to use some other choices in paper, but I really like working a full sheet of Natsumi 4007, and I still have a good supply left, but I'm kind of hoarding it, using it very sparingly. You know, one edition a year, maybe, that's it.
Well, no, and it's true. Printmakers, there's two things that they love. It's the matrix that they work on. I happen to have been an Italio major at Iowa, and so we use copper, and I love the feel of copper, and of just even taking a stylus and drawing on it. There's something about it. And you obviously love wood, but then it's also the kind of paper that you're using. It's that feel of paper, and you have managed to find the perfect paper for you, and it has become very personalized, hasn't it?
Yeah. Now this little print was actually my second 6x12, second small print that I ever made, and it was my favorite. I loved it, and I thought, I'm gonna just treat it as a maquette, and I'm gonna do a big one.
And a maquette is a
for the big one.
Works. I just love it. I really do. Here is a very popular print, I believe. This was in Emergence, wasn't it? Was this in Emergence?
No, it was in the women's celebration of women artists show, and it was also in the members show recently here at the Art Guild. And Hokusai is my favorite 19th century Japanese printmaker, and this is my homage to him.
And this is the stencil part here, correct?
Yes.
That you use. So sometimes it stands out. It's very evident, and sometimes it's kind of subtle on where you've used stencils. Here are two very large, wonderful woodcuts. And I don't know, they relate as they're probably the most landscapish of all of the works. They're traditional, but yet they're also very ephemeral.
Well, the one on the left is a monoprint, and it was kind of the last in a series of monoprints that I completed when I found out my paper maker died, and this paper was no longer available, and I'm really hoarding it now. But it started out as a edition print I didn't really like from the 90s, and I just started reworking the block and added more runs onto it, and then I took another block, which was a vertical print, and I turned it on its side, and I thought, this works as a horizontal, I'm gonna print this. I did 2 more runs with another block to complete this monoprint Lisière, which means edge. And Luna C is a reduction edition print, a reduction woodcut edition print, and that was created for the Luna Z, one word, invitational exhibition at McLean County Arts about 2 years ago. And the theme was lunacy, and so I came up with Lunacy, the 2 words, and
The moon and the sea, and you.
and I have several prints in this exhibition that really speak to my concern about climate change, and this is one of them.
One of the things I think that's so wonderful about this, and then it's also about the other three prints we have on the other wall, is the fact Rodin said that you should have no bad side to a sculpture. The back should be just as strong as the front, and which is true. And I think that's true with printmakers in particular, that sometimes vertical and horizontal can be interchanged, and it's what they do. And I mean, you can see this, but these lines that are coming this way may not have originally meant to be vertical or horizontal lines. And I think that that really helps with building a abstract kind of language that is interchangeable, and really, it complements your work so well. Here are three pieces. This wall is one of our favorite walls, just my favorite walls. And talk a little bit about how they're the same and yet how they're different.
Well, this started out as its life as a small print, and I had a size limitation for a show that I wanted to enter, and by the time I finished the print, I knew that I wanted it to be a diptych, and I wanted to use two. The one on the right is the inversion of this one. And so for the first time, when I got rejected from a juried national show, I was like, yes, I can make it into a diptych. I'm so glad I didn't get into that.
There was a reason for that.
And this is the mono print, and I can't remember what happened here, but it was basically a mistake.
Oh, it's wonderful. Oh, no, it's wonderful.
And I had this leftover one and that one that, oh, I know, I think I accidentally printed it upside down. That's what I did. But I think it works as an asymmetrical version of the symmetrical.
And really, if you're looking closely, it's just as wonderful. I think the other thing is these are two good examples about when you're doing the blended roll, how sometimes the ink has a mind of its own, and that there's a different result in the end. And that yet they're very similar, but at the same time, they're so different. They really are. And then this last piece is was this one of the first big collage pieces that you did?
This is the first time I ever collaged two pieces of paper together in a print. And this started out as a monoprint that I thought was a total disaster. I hated it, and so I tore it up. But I made a series, and Dianoia 1 was a very small piece. I needed something small, and I didn't have time to start from scratch, so I just tore out what I thought was a good composition in this big 24 by 36 print that I hated. And then I had all these scraps left over, and I played with them, and then I made Dianoia 2, and also there's a diptych that's Dianoia 3. So it's a series of three
Well, in this case, I just love this small piece that you have, and it extends from the edge just a little bit, so it gives it a little bit, I don't know, there's something about it. And I love the fact it's truly collage. There's a process called chine-coller, which is where you glue something down, just like you would with collage, but you use the press.
Yeah.
And it presses paper against paper so that it literally blends the fibers together, and you can hardly tell it. But here it's just like, it's very obvious, but yet it's very strong that way too. It just gives it I don't know, that it just is really just one of your most fun pieces. I know it started out as a disaster, but it ended up being a huge success. We're gonna look at this large piece here, Breaking, and tell us a little bit about, does it have anything to do with the water?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Like I said, I grew up on Long Island Beach in New York, and I just love the beach. I love the ocean, and my husband learned very early on in our marriage that he had to dunk me in salt water at least once a year to keep me happy. So we're both scuba divers, and we love spending time near the ocean. And this was, I think, the beginning of my new non-objective period. because the piece before that was fairly figurative. And this is when I decided that I wanted to go more abstract. And, to me, this is just,
Well, and I think the form's
The
got,
essence
the
of the
form's got
ocean.
so much larger too. You have this wonderful, almost mountainous-like thing, and then here we have an undulating kind of wave-ish thing, and obviously the break of the wave there.
yeah.
It really is quite incredible. We're gonna look at one more piece here, and this has to do with the only objective piece in the exhibit. And tell us a little bit about this. This is a monoprint also, but it's kind of a special monoprint.
It's a Mocolito, and this was my very first Mocolito. And I got a very inconsistent, well, I got an edition of 3 and three monoprints. Because I used litho pencil, which I found out after the fact was not the best choice for the Mocolito process because it's not as stable as traditional lithography. But I got an edition of 3, and then I had 3 prints that I just wasn't very happy with, and so I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to print the Mocolito block a second time in a transparent light blue, and I ended up with 2 very different mono prints.
And I think one of the other things that we always have to remember about printmaking is that, like, the different layers, the different runs of color take so long to dry.
Yeah.
And that they have to become completely dry before you put another one on, or it lifts the color and it does all sorts of terrible things to the surface of the print. And I say that because I understand you're working on a new small piece that's going to be available, because Cathie is also going to be in the Fine Art Fair, the Peoria Art Guild's Fine Art Fair, which is not exactly down on the riverfront this year. It's virtual, but you'll believe that you're on the riverfront. If you go to the Art Guild Fine Art Fair link on our webpage, you'll be able to tour all the different artists. We only have 30 this year instead of 100 and some, but Cathie is one of the artists, and you can click on her tent and go to her work and be able to purchase any of the pieces that you see here, because this show will be coming down and it will be going to your tent, shall we say. But
Yes.
thank you so very, very much. It's an honor, and this has been one of the most fun shows to install, because the color and the works are just superior to none.
Thank you so
to
much,
none.
John. I think you did a wonderful job installing it.
Yep, and thank you,
Everything works
Cathie.
beautifully.
It's been a beautiful, and it's complemented our printmaking, our printathon. We talked about that. I mean, just to be able to have those printers come in here and be surrounded by that art, it's been really fun. So it was good timely exhibit. So yes, if you want to visit the fair, I'm going to get that plug in, PeoriaArtGuild.org. Will launch on Friday. So thank you guys, and
Thank you.
we'll see you all soon.
And buy at the